Welcome to The Silence Between Shadows, a magical journey designed to guide you into peaceful rest. If you're simply looking for the story, you can find precise chapter timestamps in the video description. This audiobook is crafted to help you release the day's tensions and explore a gentle magical landscape of healing and transformation. Before we begin, take a moment to settle into your most comfortable position. Let your body sink into your surface, whether a bed, couch, or soft chair, feeling fully supported and at ease. Adjust your blankets or pillows, creating a personal sanctuary of calm. This is your sacred space of restoration, where the magical boundaries between waking and dreaming softly dissolve. Let's take a soothing breath together. Inhale slowly through your nose, allowing the air to flow like a gentle breeze through a misty forest. As you exhale through your mouth, imagine releasing any accumulated tension, each breath washing away the sharp edges of your day. Feel your body becoming as fluid and responsive as the magical landscapes in our story, where healing occurs in the most subtle of moments. If your mind begins to wander, that's perfectly natural. Allow your thoughts to drift like soft clouds across an expansive sky, gently returning your attention to the rhythm of your breath or the sound of my voice. There's nothing you need to do except listen and allow the story of Elmara and her magical journey to carry you into the most peaceful of rest. Chapter 1. The Threshold Awakens. The cottage at the edge of the misty forest breathed with its own quiet magic, its weathered wooden walls holding generations of unspoken stories. Elmara Nightwhisper stood by the window, watching dawn's first light dissolve the night's shadows, her grandmother's presence lingering like a soft, familiar whisper. Old Maeve's hands had always been a map of wisdom, each line and curve telling stories of quiet enchantment. It was in her touch that Elmara first discovered the subtle tremors of magic, the way reality could soften and bend if you knew how to listen. Some gifts, her grandmother had told her years ago, are not meant to be shouted. They are whispers between breaths, secrets that dance in the spaces most people cannot see. The morning light caught something unexpected, a luminescence that seemed to breathe and pulse just beyond the window's edge. Not a reflection, not a trick of early sunlight, but something alive with potential. Elmara's fingers traced invisible patterns in the air, and the light responded, rippling, shifting, creating delicate geometric patterns that seemed to pulse with an intelligence of their own. Her breath caught. This was different from the small magical moments she'd experienced before. The way flowers would lean toward her touch, how shadows seemed to retreat when she felt particularly calm. This was something more profound, more alive. Outside, the forest seemed to lean closer. Soft pine and moss scents drifted through the open window, carrying whispers of ancient understanding. A distant wind chime, though no physical chime hung anywhere nearby, sang a melody that felt like a welcome. "You're awakening," a voice whispered, not spoken aloud, but understood somewhere between thought and sensation. Era, the guardian spirit, materialized not as a solid form, but as a gentle luminescence that moved with the grace of remembered moonlight. Its presence was a comfort, a promise of understanding that transcended physical boundaries. Elmara's hands continued their delicate dance, creating patterns in the air that seemed to breathe and respond. Each movement was a conversation, each gesture a language more nuanced than words could capture. Some are born to see the world, Era's voice drifted like morning mist, and some are born to see between the worlds. The cottage around her seemed to pulse, walls breathing, shadows softening, reality itself becoming something more fluid, more alive. Elmara understood in that moment that her gift was not something to be feared or hidden, but a bridge between what is and what could be. Her grandmother's last words echoed in her mind. The most powerful magic lives in compassion, in the ability to see the unspoken stories that move through all living things. Outside, the forest continued its quiet symphony. Branches swayed with a rhythm that felt like breathing, leaves whispering secrets older than memory. And Elmara stood at the threshold, not between two worlds, but at the heart of a world most never noticed. Something was awakening. Something extraordinary was beginning. Chapter 2: Echoes of Unhealed Wounds. The morning light drifted like gossamer threads through the misty margins of the whispering margins, where reality breathed soft and uncertain. Elmara Nightwhisper stood at the threshold of a luminescent clearing, her fingers tracing delicate patterns in the air that seemed to shimmer and respond to her touch. Era, the guardian spirit, materialized beside her, not as a solid form, but as a gentle luminescence that pulsed with compassionate understanding. "You are learning," the spirit whispered, its voice like the softest of wind chimes. "Each touch creates a language beyond words." Elmara's breath caught in her throat. The landscape around her responded to her emotions, soft greens and silvery blues bleeding into one another like watercolor dreams. She had discovered this gift gradually, a magical sensitivity that allowed her to feel the emotional currents flowing beneath the surface of reality. A distant figure emerged from the mist, Magnus Shadowmend, his form initially blurred, then gradually crystallizing. His emotional landscape preceded him, a complex tapestry of muted grays and deep, wounded blues that seemed to ripple with unspoken pain. "You don't have to speak," Elmara found herself saying, her voice as gentle as the morning light. "Sometimes healing begins in the silence between shadows." Magnus looked surprised, as if no one had ever offered him such unconditional understanding before. The misty landscape around them softened, responding to the tender moment of connection. Distant wind chimes, though no physical chimes existed, sang a quiet, ethereal melody. Era's luminescent form shifted, creating soft patterns that spoke of compassion and potential. "Observe," the spirit murmured to Elmara. "Healing is not about erasing pain, but about understanding its rhythm." As Magnus drew closer, Elmara noticed how the landscape responded to his emotional state. Shadows seemed to breathe, lightening and darkening with his internal movements. A soft lavender scent drifted drifted through the air, not from any visible source, but emerging from the emotional landscape itself. "I've carried these shadows for so long," Magnus whispered, his voice barely audible. The words seemed to create ripples in the misty environment, gentle waves of unspoken history. Elmara extended her hand, not to touch physically, but to create a bridge of empathetic connection. The magical sensitivity that flowed through her began to weave, subtle, almost imperceptible, creating pathways of understanding. The guardian spirit Era watched, its luminescence pulsing with ancient wisdom. This was magic in its most profound form, not spectacular displays of power, but the quiet, transformative energy of compassionate connection. Soft pine and moss scents drifted through the clearing. The boundaries between Magnus, Elmara, and the surrounding landscape began to dissolve, a gentle merging of emotional landscapes, of unspoken stories finding their quiet resolution. "Breathe," Era whispered, and they did. Magnus, Elmara, the landscape itself, breathing in synchronicity, creating a momentary harmony that felt like the most delicate of healing spells. The morning light continued to drift, soft and forgiving, promising nothing more than the potential of gentle transformation. Chapter 3. Weaving Emotional Threads. The soft light of mid-morning filtered through the whispering margins, transforming the landscape into a canvas of liquid possibility. Elmara moved with a newfound grace, her fingers trailing delicate patterns that seemed to breathe and pulse with an intelligence beyond mere movement. Each gesture created subtle ripples in the fabric of reality, pathways of understanding that whispered of deeper magical connections. Era shifted beside her, a luminescent guardian whose presence felt more like a gentle breath than a defined form. Magic lives in the spaces between intention and understanding, the spirit murmured, its voice a melody that resonated with the very essence of the surrounding landscape. Magnus stood nearby, his wounded emotional landscape gradually softening, the sharp edges of his past pain beginning to blur and dissolve. The forest around them responded to Elmara's emerging abilities, leaves leaning slightly toward her, shadows shifting with a gentle responsiveness that spoke of an ancient, unspoken communication. Soft pine and moss scents drifted through the clearing, carrying whispers of healing and potential. Magnus watched, transfixed, as Elmara's hands created intricate patterns of light that seemed to weave through the very fabric of reality. "I never understood," Magnus said softly, his voice barely a whisper, that pain could be something other than a burden. The words hung in the air, delicate as spider silk, charged with a vulnerability that seemed to make the very atmosphere tremble. Elmara turned to him, her eyes holding a wisdom that belied her youth, a compassionate understanding that transcended words. Era's luminescence pulsed, creating gentle patterns that spoke of transformation. "Healing is not about erasing," the spirit explained, "but about understanding. Each wound carries a story, each shadow a potential for light." The Guardian's words seemed to create invisible threads that connected Elmara, Magnus, and the living landscape around them, a delicate web of compassionate magic. As Elmara approached Magnus, the landscape began to shift. Shadows softened, becoming less defined, more fluid. The boundaries between emotional states, between pain and potential, between past and present, began to dissolve. Her hands moved with a gentle intentionality, creating pathways of understanding that seemed to breathe with their own quiet magic. A distant wind chime sang, though no physical chime existed, a melody that spoke of healing, of transformation. Magnus felt something inside him begin to unravel, not painfully, but with the gentle inevitability of a flower opening to morning light. Elmara's magical sensitivity created a bridge, a delicate pathway of empathy that honored his pain without demanding its complete dissolution. The whispering margins responded to their connection, colors shifting, becoming more luminescent, soft greens and silvery blues bleeding into one another like watercolor dreams. Time seemed to breathe, to expand and contract with the rhythm of their emerging understanding. Magnus watched, transfixed, as Elmara's magical ability transformed the landscape around them, revealing the profound interconnectedness of all things. Some magic, Era whispered, its luminescence pulsing with ancient wisdom, is so subtle that it can only be felt, never fully explained. The spirit's words hung in the air, a promise of deeper revelations to come. And in that moment, standing at the threshold of understanding, Elmara and Magnus breathed in synchronicity, two souls beginning to understand the transformative power of compassionate connection. The morning light continued its gentle dance, promising nothing more than the potential of gentle transformation, of healing that occurred not with dramatic gestures, but with the softest of touches, the most delicate of understandings. Chapter 4. The Compassionate Passage. The light in the whispering margins shifted like breath, soft, unpredictable, alive with unspoken potential. Magnus stood at the edge of a silvery clearing, his emotional landscape slowly transforming from a dense, wounded terrain to something more luminescent, more permeable. Elmara moved beside him, her magical sensitivity creating delicate pathways of understanding that seemed to weave through the very fabric of reality. Era, the luminescent guardian, pulsed with an ancient wisdom that transcended physical form. Healing is not a destination, the spirit murmured, its voice a melody that resonated with the surrounding landscape, but a continuous conversation between what has been and what might become. The words hung in the air like gossamer threads, catching the light in impossible, shimmering patterns. Magnus's hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from a dawning understanding that was both terrifying and profound. His past had always been a landscape of sharp edges and shadowed valleys, memories that cut like fractured glass. But here, in the presence of Elmara and Era, those memories began to soften, to dissolve into something more fluid, more forgiving. "I never thought healing could feel like this," he whispered, his voice barely audible above the gentle rustling of unseen leaves. The landscape around them responded, soft greens and silvery blues bleeding into one another, creating a living canvas of emotional transformation. Distant wind chimes sang a melody that spoke of possibility, of redemption that existed beyond words. Elmara reached out, not with her hand, but with something more subtle, more profound. Her magical sensitivity created a bridge of understanding, a delicate pathway that honored Magnus's pain without demanding its complete erasure. She saw the wounded landscape of his past not as something to be fixed, but as a living story waiting to be witnessed. The whispering margins breathed around them. Soft pine and moss scents drifted through the clearing, carrying whispers of ancient healing. Shadows softened, became less defined, more fluid. The boundaries between emotional states, between pain and potential, between past and present, began to dissolve like morning mist. Some wounds, Era explained, its luminescence pulsing with intricate patterns, are not meant to be healed quickly, but understood deeply. The Guardian's words created invisible threads that connected Elmara, Magnus, and the living landscape. A delicate web of compassionate magic that seemed to pulse with its own heartbeat. Magnus felt something inside him begin to unravel, not painfully, but with the gentle inevitability of a flower opening to morning light. His memories, once sharp and cutting, began to soften. He saw them now not as permanent wounds, but as chapters of a story still being written, still capable of transformation. Elmara's hands moved in delicate patterns, creating pathways of light that seemed to breathe and pulse with an intelligence beyond mere gesture. Each movement was a conversation, each subtle shift a language more nuanced than words could capture. The landscape around them responded, colors becoming more luminescent, reality itself becoming more fluid, more alive. Time seemed to breathe, to expand and contract with the rhythm of their emerging understanding. Magnus watched, transfixed, as Elmara's magical ability revealed the profound interconnectedness of all things. Pain was not an endpoint, but a passage, a threshold to be traversed with compassion, with gentle intention. "You are not defined by your wounds," Elmara whispered, her voice as soft as the first light of dawn. "You are defined by your capacity to understand, to transform, to continue." The words hung in the air, a promise of healing that existed beyond the traditional boundaries of magic, of understanding. Era's luminescence pulsed with ancient wisdom. "Some magic," the spirit murmured, "is so subtle that it can only be felt, never fully explained." And in that moment, standing at the threshold of understanding, Elmara and Magnus breathed in synchronicity, two souls beginning to understand the transformative power of compassionate connection. The morning light continued its gentle dance, promising nothing more than the potential of gentle transformation, of healing that occurred not with dramatic gestures, but with the softest of touches, the most delicate of understandings. Chapter 5. Breathing Between Realities. The final light of day dissolved into the whispering margins, creating a landscape that breathed with the most subtle of magics, a realm where emotional boundaries became as fluid as water, as luminescent as memory. Elmara stood at the heart of this transformative space, her understanding of magic no longer something to be learned, but something she had become. Ere, the guardian spirit, shimmered beside her, not as a separate entity, but as an extension of the magical landscape, a living consciousness that pulsed with ancient wisdom. "You have discovered," the spirit whispered, its voice a melody that resonated through the very fabric of reality, "that true magic lives in the spaces between understanding." Magnus moved beside Elmara, his emotional landscape transformed. Where once there had been sharp edges of pain, now existed a terrain of soft luminescence, wounded memories softening, becoming translucent, losing their ability to wound. The whispering margins responded to their collective healing, colors shifting like breath, boundaries dissolving into pure potential. "I never imagined healing could feel like this," Magnus said, his voice barely a whisper. The words hung in the air, delicate as spider silk, charged with a vulnerability that made the surrounding reality tremble. Soft pine and moss scents drifted through the clearing, carrying whispers of transformation that seemed to breathe with their own consciousness. Elmara's hands moved in intricate patterns, creating pathways of light that pulsed with an intelligence beyond mere gesture. Each movement was a conversation, each subtle shift a language more profound than words. The landscape around them responded, soft greens and silvery blues bleeding into one another, creating a living canvas of emotional metamorphosis. Distant wind chimes sang a melody that spoke of infinite possibility. Though no physical chimes existed, their music emerged from the very fabric of their shared emotional landscape. Time seemed to breathe, to expand and contract with the rhythm of their emerging understanding. Magnus watched, transfixed, as Elmara's magical ability revealed the profound interconnectedness of all living things. "Some gifts," Era murmured, its luminescence creating intricate patterns that danced between shadow and light, "are not meant to be controlled, but understood. They are conversations, not conquests." The Guardian's words created invisible threads that connected Elmara, Magnus, and the living landscape, a delicate web of compassionate magic that seemed to pulse with its own heartbeat. The boundaries between individual consciousness began to dissolve. Elmara felt Magnus's memories not as separate experiences, but as living currents that flowed through their shared magical landscape. Pain transformed into understanding, isolation into connection. The whispering margins breathed around them, a living testament to the most subtle of magical truths. "We are never truly separate," Elmara whispered, her voice carrying the wisdom of generations. "Magic lives in the recognition of our profound interconnectedness." Her words created ripples that extended beyond the immediate landscape, touching realms of possibility that existed just beyond perception. Magnus felt something profound shifting inside him, not a dramatic transformation, but a gentle awakening. His past was no longer a wound to be healed, but a story to be understood, a landscape to be honored. The sharp edges of his memories softened, becoming translucent, losing their power to define him. Era's luminescence pulsed with the rhythm of ancient stars, of memories older than individual consciousness. "Some magic," the spirit murmured, "is so profound that it can only be felt, never fully explained." And in that moment, standing at the threshold of infinite understanding, Elmara and Magnus breathed in perfect synchronicity, two souls discovering the transformative power of compassionate connection. The final light of day continued its gentle dance, promising nothing more than the potential of gentle transformation. The whispering margins seemed to sigh, a breath of pure potential, of magic that existed beyond definition, beyond explanation, a living, breathing testament to the most profound of human experiences.